Hey, seventh graders, last video, I just tried making a video. My other computer literally just died. I had that computer for probably longer than you've been alive, but it's over. So I'm probably going to give you one more assignment after this one, but this is pretty much it for the PowerPoints, because this is the last thing we have to do. And we're talking about how Reconstruction ends. All right, so Reconstruction ends. Most people want to get out of Reconstruction by the 1870s. People want to move on. Lincoln's dead. Grant's presidency is there's a lot of problems. Rutherford B. Hayes and a man named Henry Tilden are going to run for, Samuel Tilden are going to run for office. And this election between these two is going to cause the end of Reconstruction. Tilden wins the election, wins the popular vote. But he doesn't have enough electoral college votes, and this is kind of what's happening. We've seen this happening a little bit more in the last few elections that we've had. 3 states are in dispute, and those states are in control of the Republicans. They're the ones that have the power in those states. So Rutherford B. Hayes, who is a Republican, basically says, I will end Reconstruction. I will pull troops out. I will do anything you want just as long as you get me elected. And those states agree, and those states will put their electoral college votes towards Rutherford B. Hayes. He'll win the election, and now really the conflict is really over. The Civil War is truly over. There's no more troops in the South. There's no more war going on. It's done. So we're leaving everything back to what can happen with the people that are in charge. The New South. There's going to be textile mills. There's going to be cash crops like cotton being grown and tobacco being grown and other stuff. They're not going to rely so much on cotton as they did before. They're going to start to build steel mills. They're going to start to do lumber production. They're going to do a whole bunch of stuff. They still have a long way to go to catch up to what the North is. And in some ways, it still hasn't done it to this very day. Hasn't really caught up. But they are on their way. All right. One thing they really start to do is they start to have, they have a lot of racism in the South. The racism during Reconstruction doesn't really go away. It stays there. There's many efforts to stop what's going on with the African Americans, the freedmen who just won their rights. They really want to restrict their right to vote because they feel if they're going to vote Republican, and Democrats are going to be out of power. So they passed these things called poll taxes, basically a tax you'd have to pay in order for you to vote. If you were poor, you couldn't afford to vote. Unfortunately, for the Democrats at the time, they're saying it's going to restrict the poor white Democrats from voting too. So they're going to have to do something called a literacy test. And you basically have to interpret and write down and interpret a section of the Constitution, which if you were just learning how to read and write, you really can't do. Unfortunately, again, a lot of poor whites that are in the South were not really well educated, and they really weren't faring much better. So they're going to pass grandfather clauses too. Okay? This grandfather clause basically says that if your grandfather was eligible to vote on or before January 1st, 1867, then the voter doesn't have to pay. The voter doesn't have to pass the test. The only people who couldn't do that, this wouldn't work for, was the African Americans, because they didn't get the right to vote before January 1st, 1867. So they're saying you have to pay this tax, or you have to do this section of the Constitution. It doesn't affect the whites anymore; they can vote. So all sorts of problems happen because of that. With those poll taxes, with those voting restrictions, a lot of Democrats are going to come back into power. And they're going to start to do all sorts of restrictions, like segregation. It's the legal separation of the races. In this one, you can see that there's a white water fountain and a colored water fountain. You can see that one is much nicer than the other. It was a custom in the North, but it was law in the South. So you are going to see segregation in a lot of places, especially throughout the United States. But it was really, really law in the South. You could be arrested for doing all sorts of stuff if you were an African American drinking out of the white water fountain. That could be a problem. You could be arrested for that. Sounds kind of ridiculous, but that's what they did. There were separate schools, there were separate theaters, there were separate pools, there were separate water fountains, there were separate streetcars, there were separate cemeteries. It seems ridiculous. It really does, because I haven't lived through it, and because you haven't lived through it. But this was custom in the South that became law. And it's going to be a long time before this really gets straightened out. So they become known as Jim Crow laws. Right? Jim Crow was a character at the time, but it's also, crows are black, and that's what they're really trying to restrict. So any aspect of society you could think of, in all probability, had some form of segregation. Restaurants, again, laundromats, movie theaters, school buses, schools. I mean, everything was just, it was, if you could think of it, it was probably segregated. Hospitals, I mean, even areas and sections of towns. That's kind of the way it worked. It's just what it was. Until this case called Plessy versus Ferguson, okay? Actually, there's going to be more to it, but there's this court case that ruled that segregation was legal as long as the facilities were separate but equal. So Plessy versus Ferguson says it's okay, because people took the states to court and said, no, this is not right. But they said you could do it as long as the facilities were separate but equal. But in reality, you were supposed to build stuff the same exact way, and in reality, it just didn't work out that way. The schools that were in the African American communities weren't as good. We just saw a picture of the water fountain a couple slides before this. It wasn't the same. They were saying it was the same, but it was not the same. Okay? And this is going to be a problem until the late 1960s. Okay? You're going to talk more about this as you get into it next year. But this was the kind of the start of the segregation movement. You're not going to see anything happen until Brown versus the Board of Education, where they basically rule that Plessy versus Ferguson is wrong. Separate, and it was not equal. Separate was separate, and that's kind of why you have kids that were in your class from all sorts of different nationalities, all sorts of different races, because we figured it out. At least we thought we did. So I hope you're all doing well. I hope to see you soon. If not, I will see you in September, and I will talk to you. You're going to have a whole bunch of time to make, not a whole bunch of time to make stuff up. You're going to have like 1 or 2 days to make stuff up, and that's it, guys. So if you haven't gotten anything, get on the ball and get working. I'll see you soon. Bye.